It's the Growing for Market podcast.
The really shocker to me was our stock, fragrance stock that is a pretty big crop for us in the winter and the summer or the spring. In the first year of the SARE grant, we grew it at 40 degrees, which seemed great because it was fuel efficient and nice and cool. And it took 21 weeks to bloom 40 degrees. And the second year, just because of what else was growing, we grew it at 60. And I think it took 10 or 11 weeks to grow at 60. And as part of the SARE project, we did the math and we actually used significantly less fuel to grow it at 60 for 10 or 11 weeks than we did to grow it at 40 for 21 weeks.
Oh,
so
wow.
it was actually cheaper to grow it hotter, which was really surprising to me.
Hello and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing flowers and vegetables for local markets. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine, proudly celebrating 35 years in 2026 as the magazine by and for vegetable and flower market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. If you grow for market, you know performance is everything. That's why so many farmers are turning to Burpee's Farmers Market. Dedicated to professional growers, Burpee is now offering non-GMO seeds in larger quantities, bred and selected for standout flavor, strong yields, and the kind of visual appeal your customers crave. All farmers market varieties are trialed at Burpee's research farm in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, where expert horticulturalists test for germination rate, vigor, disease resistance, high yield, and consistency, things that make a difference in the field and to your bottom line. The seed assortment includes USDA-certified organic varieties, Burpee-bred classics, heirlooms, and exciting new introductions. Burpee's been doing this for 150 years, and they're still creating new varieties with growers like you in mind. You can check out the full lineup at burpee.com/farmersmarket. That's burpee.com/farmersmarket. This episode is sponsored by Nifty Hoops. Nifty Hoops designs and builds high tunnel systems for growers who want dependable results. What stands out is that Nifty Hoops tunnels are complete systems designed by experienced builders with the details worked out ahead of time. That means the core components are included from the start, like end walls, ventilation, doors, baseboards, and double-layer poly, rather than being added later. The tunnels are designed for real wind and snow loads, efficient assembly, and long service life. You can choose a self-build kit with guidance from written manuals and videos, or a community build where Nifty Hoops works alongside you and the project gets completed in one day. Nifty Hoops has built more than 1,500 hoop houses across the country, including many funded through the NRCS High Tunnel Initiative. They're known nationwide for predictable outcomes and ongoing support. If you're planning a high tunnel project and want it done right, you can learn more at niftyhoops.com. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Rebecca Kutzer-Rice to the Growing for Market podcast. Rebecca is the owner and operator of Moonshot Farm in New Jersey, and I'm happy to say a frequent contributor to Growing for Market magazine because I just love your articles. The level of experience and detail in your stories makes them a great resource for readers, so if people haven't had the pleasure of reading one of your articles, we are making the one we are discussing in our conversation today called Why and How We Automated Our Flower Greenhouses public, so anyone can find it in the show notes, and also so you don't have to repeat every little thing you said, Rebecca. Also, people may be familiar with you as one of the hosts of this podcast, but today you get to be in the hot seat and talk about automations, in growing flowers in greenhouses. So I'm not going to ask you to go from scratch because you've written about it a lot in the magazine and you've done the podcast interview with Katie Kula, interviewed you back when you started hosting podcast episodes for us. So people can go back and listen to that if they want. But can you tell us a bit about your farm? I know you just started farming a new property and you may have more greenhouses since when you wrote the automation article that we're talking about today. So can you catch us up a little bit?
Yeah. Hey, Andrew. It's good to see you. Good to be back. So, yeah, I own Moonshot Farm here in New Jersey. We're about an hour from Philly, an hour from New York City. And yeah, we just bought a whole second farm. So previously we have about 9 acres that we're farming here in like central New Jersey. And we just bought a property about 40 minutes south of us, has 40 additional acres. And across the two farms, we now have, I think, 22 high tunnels, about 2 acres under cover. We might be building a few more as also this summer. So we got a little NRCS funding maybe to pop up like two more greenhouses. Somebody, I think actually like Orisha, when I first reached out to them, said something about greenhouse math and basically like you can just never have too many greenhouses. And that's what we are learning. So yeah, we've got a lot of greenhouses and we're really scaling up this season. So we grow flowers year round, pretty much like 50 weeks a year. I used to say 52 weeks, but now we're endeavoring to have a couple weeks off in there at least.
That's good.
And we have primarily been selling retail. We're in about year 7 here. So our focus has been retail, but now that we have more space, we're really scaling up our wholesale, like to wholesalers and direct to florist options as well. So my goal maybe within the next 2 years is to be like 40% wholesale. So yeah, it's an exciting, slightly overwhelming time on the farm. We're keeping both properties. On our home farm, we're pretty much going to keep all the like winter production here and early spring production, and then all of our summer production and fall. We've moved on to this new property. So it's pretty cool. Today, we're actually putting all of our high tunnels at this property into cover crops for the summer, which is like a pretty juicy, dreamy proposition, right? Like every farmer's dream to just like put cover crops all summer in those high tunnels. So hopefully by the time fall rolls around, like those beds will be really nice for our winter crops.
Yeah, well, that's very exciting to hear because I know that's always the challenge is that greenhouse space is such precious real estate. It's hard to give it up for cover crops. In fact, we had an article in, I want to say maybe like the November, December 2025 issue, or maybe January of this year, 2026, about cover cropping and high tunnels. And I mean, it both told you what to do, but one of the big things was like how to free up the space in the first place for some cover cropping. So that's great to hear that you're rejuvenating soil in all those tunnels. And I think that's a very classic thing. I think building greenhouses is addictive. I remember the first year we built 3 smallish greenhouses and I was like, we'll never need another one. And by the end of the season, I was like, how can we build more greenhouses? So I think it's kind of an addiction or also, building greenhouses. So it's fun to see your farm growing and hear how it's growing and changing over the years. So can you tell us, like, it might be a long list, so you don't have to go into every single last one, but can you tell us, like, what flower crops you're growing in greenhouses? Because I ask because I know you have field production and greenhouse. So, like, what are you devoting that precious greenhouse space to?
Yeah, totally. I guess I'll take it kind of season by season. So winter tulips are sort of our biggest deep winter crop. We're going to grow around 300,000 tulips this year. So it's a big crop for us.
It's a lot of tulips.
And and then ranunculus and anemones as well as freesia. I know I wrote an article a few months ago about freesia and Growing for Market magazine. We lost our whole freesia crop last year, which I think I talk about in that article. So hopefully we'll have a redemptive freesia season coming up. And then in the spring, we do stuff in a lot of like unheated high tunnels that we overwinter that'll bloom around Mother's Day here in New Jersey. So snapdragons is a big one, campanula, lupin and delphinium are also really big bloomers for us. So I think I also wrote an article about lupin. And then in the summer, lisianthus and asters, as well as lilies and callas, are the big crops that we grow in greenhouses. And then in the fall, it's all about heirloom chrysanthemums. So we do a really big mum crop. Those are great because you can plant them out really late, like all the way into July. So if you're kind of wanting to grow all that other spring stuff, the mums are a great crop you can put in later on. And not to be a broken record, but I think we also had an article about heirloom chrysanthemums. Those are such a popular crop now these days. Yeah.
Yes, you did. Well, and that just reflects how much excellent writing you've been doing for the magazine, all those bylines that you've got. And so I will take this time to point out to our audience that all those articles are archived digitally at growingformarket.com. And so if anybody wants to read any of those, catch up on them, everything's archived. Subscribers can read all the the past articles over there. So lots of food for thought if people haven't already read your articles.
And can I just jump in and like for listeners who maybe don't have high tunnels or are new to them for flowers, I just some of the big like why grow flowers in high tunnels.
Oh, please,
I mean,
yeah.
season extension is obviously a really big one. And in the winter, we do heat our high tunnels and you kind of add a zone without heat. So here we're like a zone 7A or so. So it seems like in the high tunnels, it's the soil's responding more like a zone 8. The soil doesn't really freeze in there and the plants just stay happier over the winter, even without heat. But for cut flowers, the tunnels make such a big difference in flower quality. So the flowers just get so much taller. They're protected from rain damage to some extent. If you put like insect netting up, that can help with insect damage. If we put shade cloth on our tunnels, and so here in the summer, sometimes the tunnels are actually a little cooler than outside, which surprises some people. So the tunnels are just like really the best quality flowers are coming out of there. So if listeners don't have a tunnel yet or wondering why flower growers are so obsessed with their tunnels, that's why.
Yeah, it definitely turns into an obsession. Okay, well, those are all really good reasons, and thank you for laying those out. Actually, I have a quick follow-up question on some of that. Have you ever planted the same crop in a tunnel that has shade cloth and one that doesn't have shade cloth and noticed if the stems get longer in the one with shade cloth? Or do you have any way to measure that?
I haven't, but I'm kind of running a weird little experiment right now because at our new farm, the tunnels are really long. They're 150 feet long, and our shade cloth that we own already is only 100 feet long. And so my aster tunnel, the last 50 feet of it doesn't have the shade. And I'll tell you, I actually took some pictures, but what's crazy is those last 50 feet without shade have so much more weeds than the shaded area, which really surprised me. I mean, like a remarkable difference in weed vigor. So it's almost like the, sun loving weeds are really growing fast without the shade. So it'll be kind of a trial this year to see, but I'm pretty sure the asters with the shade will get significantly taller than without. Yeah. Cause think about it. They're reaching for the light. They're a little bit cooler. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. I would not have anticipated the weed issue. I would have anticipated the stems and everything because I know, I'm coming from much more of a vegetable side of things, but I know I've seen tomatoes growing in a shaded tunnel versus an unshaded tunnel in very arid environments. And the leaves, like the same variety will look much bigger leaves in the shaded tunnel, of course, because I think they're just trying to make bigger solar panels to make up for whatever light the shade cloth is interrupting. So, all right, well, that's interesting. You'll have to get back to us on that weed situation, but that's very interesting. So, okay, well, so I asked you if you would do this interview today, and you so graciously agreed, considering it's July and you no doubt have a million things to do on your own farm, because as you may know, I'm working on a greenhouse video course and coaching program with the folks up at Arisha Greenhouse Automation. And for the whole first year of the course, we're focusing on tomatoes for a couple of reasons. We're going to do other crops in the future, but one reason we chose tomatoes for the first year of our program is the economic importance of tomatoes for vegetable farms, since tomatoes are the leading or one of the leading crops on many vegetable farms. Second, there are a lot of principles of the Dutch method of greenhouse growing that I only learned about later in my career after working on a lot of farms that didn't use those greenhouse growing principles that I think could benefit market farms' greenhouse tomato production. And third, there's just so much that can be done to improve the yield of greenhouse tomato crops as a crop that you can grow for up to a year, the whole time steering the crop to balance vegetative and fruiting growth during that whole time. Greenhouse tomatoes are a crop that have always been my favorite. So we can spend a whole year on the ins and outs of greenhouse tomatoes, no problem. And given that importance of greenhouse tomatoes to so many vegetable farms, we thought it was worth taking that much time in the first year of the program. So that was a long intro, and we're not here to talk about tomatoes. We're here to talk about flowers, but I wanted you in the audience to get the scope of what we're talking about here today. So let's talk about flowers. But I know flowers are as profitable, if not more so, than many vegetable crops in greenhouses. So greenhouse flowers are crucial to cover if we're going to talk about the most profitable crops for market farmers in our greenhouse course. So in your article in the February 2025 Growing for Market magazine, you talked about why and how you automated your flower greenhouses. And if I had to summarize that article in one run-on sentence, I would say that you automated your greenhouses because the cost of automating them was the same as what you were already paying for the labor to open and close them every day. And then once you automated them, being able to control the temperature and humidity better gave you better crop growth and less disease, particularly fungal diseases like you mentioned, powdery mildew on your ranunculus, but also dehumidification will help with botrytis and a lot of other fungal diseases people may be dealing with. So, how did I do summarizing your article? Tell me what I got wrong or anything that has changed in the year and a half or so since you wrote that article.
Yeah. Well, first of all, and just so people know, I haven't been like asked to say this or whatever, but I've been hearing great feedback about the tomato course, like from growers who are really experienced and really know their tomatoes, that just how much they're learning. And so that's cool. It'd be cool if, we could do something like that more about flowers.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad it's useful for people.
The automation has definitely been a game changer for us. I mean, I think I mentioned, we have 22 tunnels across the two farms. We have about a dozen here. It was taking like 2 hours every day just to walk around the whole farm, open every side manually. I mean, if you have one tunnel, it doesn't take a ton of time, but between opening everything up and closing everything at night, especially during those shoulder seasons, it was such a labor drag. Also, like a mental load just to have to remember every day to open and close everything that we would occasionally forget and suffer dire consequences. I have a grower friend last year, speaking of tomatoes, who forgot, or his employees forgot to open them, right after they had been transplanted. Really hot summer day, and they all just fried.
Oh my God.
So having a system in place that will just remember it for you, open, close them when you need to, has been a really big help for us. In terms of disease prevention, yeah, that's also been a really big game changer. What's cool in Orisha is you can see the humidity levels. It has, a humidity tracker, and you can really see when it's high, and then it will really drop when you open those sides and ventilate. It also has the capability for growers who do have heat in their tunnels. If folks don't know, there's a really effective way to ventilate a tunnel and get the humidity out, which is to open it a little bit and also run your heater. And that will just really cause the humidity to drop, especially going into the nighttime when humidity can often rise. So burning off the humidity before, like at dusk. And that you can do manually, but it's pretty fuel intensive and also time intensive, because you're just kind of like standing there ventilating and kind of making it up. And Orisha has the option to basically automate that dehumidification process. So it'll, vent a little bit and run the heaters a little bit. And I guess it's controlled by an algorithm. So it does it like quite efficiently and very effectively. That's made a huge difference, especially you had mentioned botrytis, which historically has been a huge problem on our farm. So botrytis basically can't infect plants if the humidity doesn't get high enough. There's like a threshold. I think it's like 80%. If it's above 80% or whatever, 90%, you're almost positively going to have botrytis if the fungus is present. But if you can keep it below that level, it's very unlikely that you will. And so Orisha's done a great job of lowering our humidity so that mold doesn't take hold.
Yeah. And yeah, I was reminded when I went back and read your article again for this interview, you talked in there about how you were doing a little bit of that heating to reduce humidity before you automated. And I think because growers were doing it for years. Yeah, just manually. But it's kind of a hard thing to do, to like open your vents and turn your heater on at the same time, because it feels counterintuitive, obviously, like you're just burning money. But it's one of those things where you will have so much less fungal disease if you can keep that humidity low, that it really pays for itself to keep the humidity down. Because of course, botrytis and other fungi are such big problems. I mean, in vegetable production, but I think in a few of your articles over the years, and flower growers will know, if you get those fungal infections on the petals, of course, like the crop can survive, but if you have fungus on the petals, it's probably unsellable. And so it's one of those things where spending a little bit of money to dehumidify probably pays back many times over in better crop growth and just salability of not getting those fungal diseases. So
exactly. The other cool thing about Orisha, I mean, if you're manually opening and closing stuff, like as we did for many years, there's pretty much like two options. Like you're going to go and open all the tunnels, or you're going to go and you're going to close them all. You're not going to go out like multiple times a day and open a little bit and close a little bit and open one side, but not the other. But Orisha can kind of all day long monitor your temp and humidity. So especially during those shoulder seasons, maybe it's hot for a few hours in the afternoon, but cold the rest of the day. And it can help, it'll monitor those temperatures and then adjust all day long. So you're really at that optimal range for a much longer time.
Yes, and that's a really good point you make in the article too. Is that there's a difference between putting things on timers and actually automating it in relation to the greenhouse climate. Because when we have an Orisha system now that's nice, it just opens and closes the greenhouses. But we used to do the kind of thing where in the summertime we would just roll them up in the morning and roll them down in the evening, and that's good, but it's also, there's a saying they have up here in New England that probably people say in a lot of parts of the country is, if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes. So we would have, because we had field production too. And so it would be super sunny. We'd roll up the tunnels in the morning, go out, do something in a field, and the clouds would come over and it'd be overcast for an hour. And so we knew that the temperature was getting too low in the greenhouse, let's say, but it wasn't worth leaving what we were doing to come back and roll the sides up and down. So I think that's one real, I'm a huge fan of automation. And I'll say, this doesn't, like, I'm working with Orisha on this project, but it's like, you can do this stuff there's different automation controllers. Some of them, I just want to draw a line between the greenhouse controllers that function more like a timer. Like you were saying in your article, like roll the sides up at 9 o'clock in the morning and roll them down at 7 o'clock in the evening or something like that. Because of course, then there's going to be the cloudy, rainy day where it's below the ideal temperature, so at 9 o'clock in the morning. So having greenhouses on a timer is better than having to do it yourself. And then, but you're definitely going to notice a improvement in growth if you can actually automate it, where you tie the opening and closing to an actual temperature set point or other climate set point, so that so it can make those fine adjustments all day long. It's not just like opening. It's not just doing automatically the version of like opening the sides in the morning and closing at night, where you can have I just want to be clear with people. When we say automation, we're talking about the greenhouse being able to actually make little changes throughout the day, which will help your plants grow so much better, because, plants are just like us. They have a preferred temperature range that they want to stay in. And the longer that we can keep them in that range, the better they're going to grow. And so that's a huge, huge benefit of going automation and not just a timer. And I don't know if this is an issue for people or not. I'll say automation is not the same as AI. There's a lot of healthy skepticism out there about AI. I don't think this is even AI. This is just telling basically your greenhouse has a controller brain where you tell it, keep it between these temperature points, keep it between these humidity points, and it just does it. It's not like thinking for itself, really. You're basically telling it, do this, and it's just doing that all day long, making little adjustments. And so I think that's maybe another quick point I'll make here, is that when we talk about the greenhouse environment, that's why I usually say climate and not just temperature, because I know when I was first starting getting involved in greenhouse growing, I was really focused on temperature. I was like, oh, well, things grow so much better because the temperature is better, which is true. But the other thing that we've already talked about that's really important to control in a greenhouse is the humidity. And so that's why a lot of times I'll say climate to mean temperature and humidity. That can take into other things like light intensity. But, I like to use the word climate to reflect the more three-dimensional nature of managing temperature and humidity and possibly other factors, not just temperature. So I try to say temperature when I mean temperature. I try to say climate when I mean the whole range of factors that will help plant growth. So
another good feature about Orisha, though I might have some PTSD after this past winter, but unlike a lot of apps that are out there that will like ping on your phone if something's wrong, the temperature's dropping or something, Orisha will call you, and it will call you over and over and over again until the situation is resolved, which is great if you're like my husband and you're like a pretty deep sleeper. Of course, every time I get an Orisha alert, I like have a mild panic attack. And this winter we did lose a whole greenhouse to freeze. We didn't run out of propane, but we had like a propane supply issue, and we lost the whole greenhouse. But, during that night, Orisha just kept on calling me, which is a really good feature, so that when things are wrong, it'll notice that and let you know, and it won't give up until you do know. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good point to make, because I think a lot of greenhouse like controller and automation systems will send you an alert. And so, maybe it's good to point out that it's good to like keep getting alerted until the problem is fixed. That might be a feature like people would want to think about if they're choosing an automation system.
Yeah, it's because it's pretty easy to sleep through because those, in my experiences, those disasters usually happen at about 2 in the morning. So, uh, yeah.
Yes. Well, that's because when your heaters are running hard. And so, yeah, it seems to always happen in the middle of the night when it happens. So, okay. The simple question that could have a really long answer that I've been trying to set up is whether you think there is one or more flower crops that would benefit from an in-depth treatment for greenhouse growing, like we're doing with tomatoes. So, I mean, in the way that it's not unusual to go to a vegetable farm and see a greenhouse devoted solely to tomatoes for most or all of a season, are there any flower crops that market farmers are likely to devote a whole house to? Or do you think with flowers, the techniques in the greenhouse are similar enough to field growing that it's more about finding the right temperature and humidity and other automation set points for specific crops and then growing them using field growing techniques? And it's just that they'll grow better in an environment that's been tailored to fit their specific climate needs. And I should say that if we were to expand our greenhouse course to in-depth flower crops, we would partner with an experienced grower for the flower crop specific parts. Since we're talking in the course from our own experience on the vegetable side of things, we would find people who are experienced in growing specific greenhouse floral crops if we decided to do the in-depth treatment for any flower crops. And I also want to take this opportunity to ask our audience to weigh in if there are any floral or vegetable crops, for that matter, that are super important to the audience that you would want the in-depth treatment on in a greenhouse course in the future. Email me, message us on social media. We really want to know what you need to learn about. So what do you think? What do you think, Rebecca? Are there any courses that are like so important to greenhouse, kind of like the way like tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, eggplant, or lettuce would be to vegetable growers that merit their own course? Or is it more about like finding those set points where you don't get botrytis and just growing them the way that you otherwise would out in the field?
I think there's definitely a few. You had I think it was you on this podcast a few weeks ago, a soil scientist on, and I think he used the phrase that a lot of growers are like growing by vibes. And I feel like a lot of us flower farms in the US are kind of growing by vibes, myself definitely included. Like, oh, we'll do the soil test, but just in terms of our fertility program and our heating schedule, it's just kind of like, turn the heat up, turn the heat down, sprinkle a little more fertilizer in, run some kelp through the drip lines. But it's really fascinating to see growers, not in the US, like in Europe and South America and Japan, and just how dialed in it is and how everything is very, very specific. I had the privilege last year to go visit a large ranunculus grower in Croatia. And I mean, he had it down to just such a specific science, like exactly the, ppm of calcium given on day 9. And I tell you, our ranunculus yields are, I thought, was pretty good, maybe like 4 or 5 stems a plant, on the fancier varieties that are like tissue culture, maybe like 2 or 3, but he was getting like 12, 15 stems per plant and just better quality from the exact same plants that were growing. So like the same varieties. So that really showed me that it really can be dialed in and like be a lot more scientific. So yeah, I would say ranunculus is a really, really big one. I think that's a crop that even some small scale growers will dedicate a whole hoop house or high tunnel to. I think it's one of the most popular flowers that American growers grow. It's usually blooming like around Mother's Day in many zones, so people can sell it. And just, I know for us that I can sell any ranunculus that I am able to grow. And it's also a crop that's caused a lot of problems for us. We talked about botrytis, powdery mildew, pest issues, and Orisha has really helped us, dial in a lot of those issues. But I think it's a crop that I see a lot of people struggling with. And I think, it's one that has the potential to be really revenue generating. I would say that's probably my top candidate for a deep dive. And then I was also thinking about snapdragons as another one. Snapdragons are another crop that local snapdragons are just like so much superior to imported. They're often just huge and fragrant and fresh. But they're another crop that I think people struggle with. Snaps, I don't know if you know, but they're organized by different like groups. So, there's certain varieties when a plant in certain seasons, it gets a little bit complicated. And I think I know again for us, like that's a crop with the right greenhouse conditions is just spectacular. But also, if those greenhouse conditions are like off a little bit, like we grew our snaps this year 10 degrees hotter, and it actually made them like less good because it was like a little bit too warm, a little too fast. So a little cooler was better for the snaps. And that's a crop that could pretty much be grown all year long. So you could harvest that one 50 weeks a year, I think, if you wanted to in a lot of regions. And then the third one I was thinking was lisianthus, which I think is another crop that growers really struggle with. It has a lot of like unique temperature needs. So lisies, we usually plant them when it's still quite cool out, maybe in February or March in our region. So they need a little frost protection and coddling at that young stage. But then maybe like the tomatoes, like you want them to put on enough vegetative growth before they bloom. And that's how you get these really nice, big, tall stems. And they've got like day length requirements as well. And lisianthus are another one that are really sensitive to like botrytis and really benefit from the ventilation that the automation offers.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, those are great suggestions. I do hear a lot about all three of those crops. Can I ask you, so if you said ranunculus, snapdragons, and lisianthus, you kind of hinted at this, or I think you did with the snapdragons. Are you running different temperature and humidity programs, or I don't know what else to call it? Are you running different temperature and humidities for those three different crops? Or are you using the same settings for all three?
Definitely different. And I would say for the most part, at this stage, we're trying to grow like one crop in a tunnel at a time, or sometimes we'll grow two or three, but they're all really compatible with each other. So, like if we go back to the freesia, for example, like we probably wouldn't grow freesia and tulips in the same house because the freesia like it pretty cool and the tulips like it like quite a bit warmer. So almost all of our crops have slightly different temperature and I mean everything wants low humidity, at least in flowers in my experience. I mean it's never going to get dangerously low for most crops. I think Sunny Meadows might have had an article a long time ago about like when they got their humidity too low and it caused some disease, but I have never gotten my humidity that low. So I don't have that issue. But yeah, so like anemones and ranunculus, we do grow those together because they like the same conditions. But most other stuff, I mean, summer crops like lisianthus, you could grow with asters. I think those would pair really well. But lisy's more like a summer crop compared to the ranunculus.
Okay, well, that makes sense. You would picking crops to grow together that play nicely together, that have similar temperature requirements, and that's a good point that you make about the humidity management. Is that I think here, well, I'm up here in the Northeast in Maine, you're in the Mid-Atlantic in New Jersey, but both fairly humid climates as far as we get rain in the summertime, and it's it tends to be relative humidity tends to be high in the summertime, and so I think up here in the Northeast, our challenge does tend to be keeping the humidity low enough to prevent those fungal diseases. But since we do have a national and really international audience in that, I mean, most of our subscribers and listeners are in Canada or the United States, but we also do have international readers and listeners. I know if people are in, say, the Southwest or more Western climates that can be very arid, they can actually run the risk of having humidity that's too low. And you're right. There's, humidity is like so many things. I know you know this, but I'm just going to say for the benefit of our audience, humidity is like so many things. It's a happy medium, right? It's like gets too high and the plants have trouble transpiring and you get fungal diseases, gets too low and plants actually, it's hard for them to transpire enough, right? Because the air is so dry, the moisture is transpiring out of the leaves too fast. And yeah, I think I know the article you mean by Gretel. And yeah, there's a whole other host of problems that we don't really see here in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, but people in desert, more like desert or arid climates will see when the humidity is too low. And so, there's various ways of dealing with all of that, and just whatever your tools are to control it, automation can help leverage those tools so you're not having to do it. And humidity has a lot to do with keeping crops healthy, whatever the season. So yeah, okay. That makes sense that you group crops cool with cool, warm with warm, I can imagine. Can you tell us if you can share some of the climate set points that you use for individual or mixed flower crops? Or if this is too big of a question, you could write an article about it if you were inclined. Could be in the winter when you're less busy if you want. So basically, I was curious if you could share any of the climate set points that you use, either with individual or mixed crops. And I don't know how, like, I know you grow a lot of different floral crops, so I don't know how, if you have a few basic sort of like, I think of them as programs. Like you tell the automation, keep the temperature in this range, keep the humidity in this range. And I think of that as a program. It's like, it's kind of like, okay, automation, go, like keep it in that range. So like, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, do you have a ton of different programs based on different crops, or do you have sort of like a few different programs, like a cool season crop program, a warm season, and a hot, or so? Like, I'm just curious how you handle that on your side of things.
Yeah, I think it would be a good article too, but we can talk about it at like a high level. And I wish that we had fewer because sometimes it gets a little confusing. But at least the way it works with Orisha is you can set it up by greenhouse, and then you kind of like set it. We kind of set it once per season. Heading into winter when we have a new crop, we'll program it that one time, and then we might not have to program it again until spring or summer. Generally, our humidity program is the same for everything. Like I said, we generally have high humidity. I think we try to keep it below 80% in our greenhouses. Orisha also uses a different humidity metric, which you probably know more about than I do. I forget the measurement that is used, but it's more accurate than a percentage. I forget what it is, but so it's more reflective, I think, of like the temperature. It's like the temperature and the humidity kind of together. So, but in general, we're trying to keep ours below 80% for everything, at least in the winter. The reason we don't go even lower than that, like 60%, is I don't know that realistically my greenhouses get very dry. They just tend to be pretty damp and humid all winter. So if we're keeping at least below that 80%, we find our disease level is better. And then our temperature really ranges. So for tulips, like I said, we try to grow those pretty hot, like maybe 60 to 65. Something else I'll add is a lot of our greenhouses, we now are using multiple heaters. So we kind of have like a stage 1 heater. And then if it's not a super cold night, that one heater is enough. And then we'll have a stage 2 heater. So if it is a really cold night, that second heater will kick in. Or in our geothermal greenhouse, which I know Katie and I have talked about on here, the geothermal is usually good to cover it. But on a super cold night, there's a second heater that could kick on. And Orisha will manage that for you as well. So you can kind of have different stages. And that's a great resiliency tip too, right? So if one of your heaters breaks, as it certainly will at 2 a.m. on the coldest night, that second heater, or sometimes now we're having third heaters, just to have that added level of resiliency so the house doesn't freeze. On the other end of the winter spectrum are like ranunculus. We grow them pretty cool, like maybe 35 to 45. Something I learned from Orisha is that it's actually more efficient to have like a wider range of temperatures. If you're just trying to say, keep it at 35, it's like going to be constantly cycling on and off and on and off. But if you have a wider range, it'll run a little more efficiently and save you on fuel. So we try to have like a 10-degree program. Ranunculus, we used to grow them quite a bit warmer, like 45 to 55, but I learned that powdery mildew like thrives in a slightly warmer house. And since we've turned it to be cooler, we have a little bit less powdery mildew. The crop time is like a week or 2 longer, but I think it's worth it for less mildew. And then other crops, it really depends. We just finished a SARE grant, and I mean, I know this isn't a shock, but temperature makes a really big difference, like in crop time. So the really like shocker to me was our stock, like fragrant stock, that is a pretty big crop for us in the winter and the summer or the spring. In the first year of the SARE grant, we grew it at 40 degrees, which seemed great because it was like fuel efficient and nice and cool. And it took 21 weeks to bloom, 40 degrees. And the second year, just because of what else was growing, we grew it at 60. And I think it took 10 or 11 weeks to grow at 60. And as part of the SARE project, we did the math, and we actually used significantly less fuel to grow it at 60 for like 10 or 11 weeks than we did to grow it at 40 for 21 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So it was actually cheaper to grow it hotter, which was really surprising to me. So I actually think that would be a great grant project someday, like just kind of the different temperature and sort of the like what is the optimal time that's like both fastest and warmest to like get the crop, but not so hot that you're just wasting a ton of fuel. So yeah, the settings really do make a difference. Sometimes we think winter growing, let's just keep it above freezing. But if you can get it, like instead of growing it at 35, you can grow it at 65, and it will make a big difference. Our tulip bulb supplier told me that basically every 10 degrees is like a week for tulips. So like tulips at 65 takes, or 60 take 4 weeks, but tulips at 40 take 6 weeks. So sometimes I think it's actually like more efficient and somehow more sustainable to grow them hotter because you'll flip them faster. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, those are some great comparisons. I'm not the biggest data guy or the best at analyzing it, but I think that's one of the huge benefits of everything being monitored and computerized now, because I feel like there's a lot of sort of like counterintuitive things around temperature and climate. Like one example, going back to the vegetable side of things, because that's what I'm most versed in. But, in the live coaching part of our course, we talk to a lot of tomato growers that will run their houses to call them like minimally heated house through the spring and keep the tomatoes at like 50 or 55 degrees, which is definitely better than letting them go below 50 or 55 degrees. But, tomatoes are really not that happy at 50 or 55. They want to be more like 60 or 65. And so we've been recommending that people, if they're running their greenhouses at 50 or 55, to bump it up at least to 60 or 65. And yeah, you're going to burn a little more fuel going up, say, from 55 to 60, but the crop is going to be so much happier and grow so much more in that time that it'll more than pay for itself. It's one of those things, is like spend a dime to make a dollar kind of things. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to demonstrate that without the data, and to be like, here, and that's another challenge, right? Is getting sort of like side by side kind of convincing data to show people like, hey, you spend a few extra bucks on propane, you make a lot of extra bucks on tomatoes, kind of thing. Which I actually have a project that I want to do that's more like a research greenhouse, because I realize it's really hard for farmers to make changes if they can't be convinced of the value of it. And also it's hard to take space out of a production greenhouse, most precious real estate, right, to sacrifice to sort of like a trial. I mean, it's so important to test our hypotheses, but it's also like we need that space to be making money. So I have a project that I hope I can get rolling that I could talk about more some other time. It's more interesting if I can get it going, because I would like to build a greenhouse that I could do some side-by-side trials of things that we know aren't best practices, to just like compare them to the best practices. But we'll talk more about that if I can get that rolling. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to touch on really quickly is, I think what you were getting at, was it vapor pressure deficit for the other way of measuring humidity?
I think maybe, yeah. Apologies. In the Orisha app, it's not like a humidity percentage. It might be that it's some acronym. Sorry to my friends at Orisha, but yeah, and it's actually, in my understanding, it's a more accurate way to think about humidity, but my brain just doesn't quite understand it yet. Like if I have to go translate Celsius, I also have to go and translate this. Yeah.
Well, no, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I since we're talking so much about climate, if I just talk really quickly about vapor pressure deficit, because vapor pressure deficit is sort of like, more for our audience, I want to say vapor pressure deficit, it is a more accurate way of measuring how dry the air is, how your crop is feeling it, because it's sort of like, when they give you the forecast by degrees and then they give you what the feels like forecast. So vapor pressure deficit is like the feels like forecast, because it's relative humidity, is the name relative. It varies so much depending on what temperature you're at. I think you can think of warm air as like a big bucket for moisture, and cold air is like a small bucket for moisture. And that's why, like you were talking about using heating for dehumidification. That's why, if all you do is turn on a heater and warm up the air, it will actually cause your relative humidity to come down, right? Because let's say, if you have 80% humidity air at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and you warm that air up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, just the act of warming it up will reduce relative humidity, because the air holding capacity of warmer air is so much more. And so that's why, like you talked about, when you're dehumidifying, you don't just want to be warming up the air. You also do want to be venting. You want to be letting the air that's more moist. And so part of the reason I want to bring up vapor pressure deficit is because it might be a setting, but at least on my Orisha system, it tracks both relative humidity and vapor pressure deficit. And it's really interesting to watch because a lot of our greenhouses are my wife's, and she's growing seedlings. So we're mostly controlling temperature. The seedlings aren't as picky about relative humidity, vapor pressure deficit as like a mature tomato or flower crop. And so we're in there, we're really just controlling for temperature and not for humidity. And it's interesting to see whenever the heater comes on, whenever that temperature goes up, the humidity line goes down. They're directly correlated. But what vapor pressure deficit is doing is it's just a more accurate reading of how much pressure or lack thereof the atmosphere is exerting on the water to want to come out of the leaves. It's basically like it's a corrected number for how dry the air is. And so even though that's why, like, if let's say you're using an automation system and you look at the readout from your greenhouse, and the temperature could be going up and down, the relative humidity could be going up and down, but if the automation system is doing its job, the vapor pressure deficit line should be staying pretty steady, because what it's doing is it's manipulating temperature and humidity to keep the vapor pressure deficit, or the amount of how dry the air actually feels to the crop, about the same. And so that's why even if your automation is doing its job, the temperature and humidity lines, like that would be one way to know it's working. If the temperature and humidity keep going up and down throughout the day, depending on the sun's coming out or going behind the clouds, the vapor pressure deficit line should be fairly constant to where you set it. Because that's really what your plant is feeling. It's like the way that it's like they always talk about, like, oh, it's a dry heat. Like that's the way that being at 100 degrees in like Arizona can feel different from being 100 degrees in New Jersey. Because if it's 100 degrees in New Jersey, you're probably also like 90% relative humidity and feeling a lot hotter because the air is close to saturated, right? So it's hard for you to sweat. The difference is in Arizona, the air is so dry that you're like the sweat is moving off your body. That's why a dry heat feels so much cooler than a humid New Jersey 100-degree day. And so that's what that vapor pressure deficit is allowing for. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's a lot more accurate way to express how much humidity the plants are actually feeling. So it's a good term for people to be familiar with. I urge you, like if you're managing a greenhouse, like if you have an automation system, it's probably really looking at vapor pressure deficit anyway. It's just, that'd be a great term if people want to know more about it, to go look up about vapor pressure deficit. But the bottom line is it's sort of like a corrected, feels like temperature for the plant, taking into account temperature and humidity. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it's an easier way to really like tell how the plant is feeling.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for that overview and lesson.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a way, like that's the nice thing about automation. We don't really need to understand it. Like you can just set your humidity. Yeah. Like say like keep it like 80. Yeah. Like what you said, 80 to prevent botrytis is a good set point. And so that's the nice about automation is you don't have to understand the nitty gritty anymore. You just have to say like, okay, at what point are my flowers going to get botrytis? Let's keep it below that. And, the system can just do all that.
Exactly.
Which is great. Cause like, I don't know, some people like to know all this stuff, but we shouldn't have to all know all of it to be able to be good growers. I don't know. I kind of enjoy knowing it, but I also, sometimes I just want to set it and forget it, want to be like, all right, greenhouse, keep it at this set point. Cause like, it reminds me actually of a grower that I used to work with up in Canada. They've got a really huge greenhouse sector in Southern Ontario in the Kingsville, Leamington area. And so I was talking to a grower who his family had greenhouses there for, I want to say like generations, like he grew up in a greenhouse growing family. And I guess his folks had a bunch of kids. And he said that when he was little, when they would see a storm coming, like their version of automation is they'd be like, all right, kids, go out, close the vents. And they'd have like all their kids go out. And, I think this is like, they've been doing this for a long time. It sounds like they were literally manually, opening and closing vents. And so like the nice thing is that we don't have to be like that anymore, because as fun as that sounded, it sounds like it took him a few minutes, sort of like you were talking about on your farm. Like you'd spend an hour every morning rolling sides up and an hour every evening rolling sides down. And, like obviously you can get much better temperature control if it doesn't involve like telling your 10 kids to all run out and close vents as quickly as they possibly can, because that even takes a while. Much more accurate if, like you were saying, your automation system can just make gradual little adjustments throughout the day to keep your crop like right where you really want it. So
And it means like you can go out to dinner, like in the winter here, it goes from above freezing to below freezing super rapidly as soon as the sun goes down. So at like 5:30, you better be at the farm to close the greenhouses. Otherwise your crops are going to freeze, or your heater's going to run with the wide open greenhouse and like burn so much fuel. But with the automation, like you can go out to dinner and not be there and come home and just everything is fine. Yeah. It's really a nice feeling.
Actually, I'm so glad you just brought that up, because I think we can talk all day long about how well your crops are going to grow when they're automated and how much better. But I feel like, it all boils down to peace of mind. It's not having to just be constantly thinking like what's open, what's not open, looking at the forecast. Ooh, the sun is going to come out. Those things are going to bake. Like, yeah, we can nerd out on all the little details, but then like it all kind of boils down to just like not having to have so many open loops in our heads, which is priceless.
Exactly. And then like once those loops, like once you're not worrying about those things, like you can have the mental capacity to think about other stuff, or relax. I mean, for us, I think I mentioned this in the article. It was like just all the time we would think we'd be like done for the day. We'd be like watching TV at night, like finally relax, and then be like, oh, we forgot to close the greenhouses, even though it's something you do every day, like it's a habit that's easy to forget. And so then we'd have to get dressed again and go outside and close up. And it's just such a drag, so just being able to not have to think about it, not have to worry about it, and actually have some time to relax, which I know all the farmers out there need.
Yeah. I'll say, I mean, I think I'm a huge fan of automation. Like whatever brand you go with, automation is doing yourself a favor, but I think it will pay for itself. Like whatever you're paying for automation will pay for itself in increased crop growth. But the biggest benefit is just peace of mind. Yeah. And not having to delegate and worry about all that stuff. So that's really kind of a nice note to end on. Rebecca, I mean, that's really the questions I had for you. But if there's anything else you'd like to say about growing flowers in greenhouses, or anything else I should have asked you before we let you go, I want to give you the opportunity to say anything else that I should have let you say or should have asked you. Otherwise, I mean, I think that was really great, like picture of how you're doing the automation and with different crops there on your farm. Is there anything else you'd like to say or that I should have asked you?
No, I don't think so, Andrew. This was a good chat. Thanks. I learned some stuff too. So thank you.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate your insight on this super important topic for our audiences. I'm already got my gears turning about like what direction we might go with the program that we're doing next. But you got a really great social media feed too. So I wanted to make sure and give you an opportunity to tell people where they can find you online or social media, wherever you want people to look you up.
Oh, yeah, sure. Our Instagram is probably best. It's just at moonshot_farm. And I try to share like a lot of little behind the scenes of the kind of daily life on the farm. I think people like don't really know where flowers come from. And so it's fun to educate our customers about all the work that goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one advice I would give anybody in our audience is just take pictures around the farm, because it's so unusual. I mean, such a small percentage of the population farms anymore. Even if you're not like an Instagram pro, chances are your audience, the people you're hoping to sell to, don't know anything about what it's like to be a day in the life of a flower grower or anything like that. So even if they're not the like flashiest pictures or whatever, I think people enjoy seeing where their food and flowers come from. So, and I certainly enjoy your Instagram feed. People should definitely check it out. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us about this at what is no doubt a busy time on your farm. And so we'll let you get back to it, and good luck with all the greenhouses and good luck with the brand new property.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks. Have a great summer.
All right. Thanks. You too, Rebecca. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.